Greetings to all that will be hearing this. We are talking interview style with Carolyn Eisenberg. Carolyn Eisenberg is a professor of diplomatic history at Hofstra University and also a co-founder of Brooklyn for Peace, which works to bring peace and justice throughout the world. Professor Eisenberg, I know from Brooklyn for Peace, has moved into high gear over the issue of diplomacy with Iran and has great concern about Senator Schumer's damaging role. Could you elaborate a bit on this?
Sure. Thanks, Ed. Let me first begin by underlining the seriousness of this issue, because for a lot of viewers this might seem remote, but ultimately this is going to become a question of whether the United States will find itself in another war in the Middle East, and that's one of the very important stakes here. And we need to acknowledge that something very positive has happened, which is we have a new government in Iran, which is clearly open to a diplomatic solution. And we've seen the Obama administration and its international partners in really embracing that change. And they reached an interim agreement, as you know. And that interim agreement with Iran is something that has been welcomed by people all over the world, and really for the first time in many years offers real hope of a peaceful resolution of this conflict and Iran coming back into the family of nations. But unfortunately we have two dissenters. The right-wing government of Israel and its legislative advocate here in the United States, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, known by the name of AIPAC to most people. And AIPAC has really mobilized against this agreement, sees a great threat to its own agenda. And at their urging, members of the Senate are now lining up behind legislation that, if enacted, will probably torpedo these very hopeful negotiations. And as was reported just this morning in The Hill, our New York Senator, Charles Schumer, has taken a lead on the Democratic side for this destructive legislation. And I have to say that we regard Senator Schumer's behavior on this issue as absolutely unconscionable.
Could you say briefly what this interim deal accomplishes?
Well, that's a challenge because it's complicated. But for the next 6 months, Iran has agreed to open its facilities to daily inspections. I don't think people appreciate that. To neutralize its stockpile of 20% enriched uranium and to halt, at least for 6 months, the enrichment of any uranium above 5%. And in return for that, the United States and its international partners have agreed to really very modest sanction relief and a promise that no new sanctions will be introduced while that final agreement is being negotiated. So I'm simplifying, pages and pages, but it's a very, very promising 6-month accord, and obviously hoping that it'll lead to something even more substantial.
All right, so explain what's happening now in the Senate and why Brooklyn for Peace is so disturbed about Senator Schumer.
Well, unfortunately, I want to put in here that both of our senators, New York Senator Schumer and Gillibrand, are now co-sponsors of a bill, S1881, a piece of legislation that is absolutely designed to torpedo these negotiations. We're emphasizing Schumer because as a leader in the Senate, he was one of the originators of the bill. And according to news reports, he is really working very hard to pressure his colleagues in the Senate to go along. So, we're especially upset about his role. The Obama administration has stated very clearly that this legislation will severely handicap, or if not destroy, any hope for a diplomatic settlement. And it's virtually begging Democratic senators to hold off. But Schumer is in full throttle, and to me, he seems more responsive to what Benjamin Netanyahu says on the subject than what his President Obama says, and more responsive to AIPAC than to his own constituents. I mean, how many people here in Brooklyn want another war in the Middle East? I think you could put them in a small elevator. And how many people here in Brooklyn want to green light Israel to launch a preemptive strike on Iran if they're not satisfied about these negotiations? Yesterday, the White House did something very extraordinary. They're so frustrated by this sabotage. They sent a message to the Senate saying, you know, if you folks want a war, why don't you just come out and say so and not hide behind a lot of fancy language. So I want to be very clear about this, that by pushing this bill, Senator Schumer is acting against the best interests of his constituents here in New York, and we think he's acting against the best interests of our country. And similarly, Senator Gillibrand, who's been relatively quiet, nevertheless, she followed Schumer by adding her name to this S1881. And she's helping to set the stage for what really could be a great human tragedy in terms of, you know, what can happen if these relationships unravel. So that's why we're upset.
Well, what can Brooklyn for Peace be doing about this, and how can new people play a part?
Well, first of all, if people want to play a part, they should just contact their organization. Brooklyn for Peace, you can find it on the website. And again, we're not the only organization working on this. There are groups all over the country that are trying to mobilize to preserve the possibility of peace. Also want people to go to our website and sign our open letter to members of Congress. We're trying to start very small with a total of about 1,000 signers. Once we do that, we'll begin delivering these letters to our legislators. So folks, sign on, tell your friends to sign on, you go right on our website and do it. We also need folks to call the DC offices of both senators. I'm going to give you the toll-free number, but I feel like I'm selling furniture. 855-686-6927, and for people watching this who forget this number, it's not difficult to get the Washington offices of your senators. The staffs in these offices are counting the calls. And as a very well-funded lobbying organization, AIPAC is keeping those phones very busy. But they don't represent the majority of the public. And it's long past time that we break AIPAC's grip on our elected officials, certainly on the issue of Iran, but frankly on U.S. policy towards Israel-Palestine. Their sway over what our elected officials do is absolutely unacceptable to us.
Well, thanks, Professor. That was quite complete. Could you just give us some final statements or a message that you would like to emphasize?
Well, I think we're at a turning point, Ed. The Obama administration is clearly, thank heavens, trying to put a break on the endless wars we've experienced. So this is a moment that's actually fraught with hope, but it's also fraught with danger. And none of us can afford to sit passively by and hope things are going to work out. Again, this can seem very remote to people. But if people don't act and make their voices heard, then we're going to end up with a very sad result. We really need to raise our voices, to nudge our friends and our relatives, and let our senators understand that it's time for them to stop listening to AIPAC and doing AIPAC's business, and really to take a stand for peace and to back the administration, our own administration, in its effort to settle a serious problem in a peaceful way.
Thanks very much, and there's a lot of work to do.
Thank you.